Hello, welcome to Business Stories to Sleep. I'm glad you're here tonight, or this afternoon, or anytime you're listening to this. It doesn't matter the time. What matters is that you can already let go of the day you just had. You can let go of the earrings. You can let go of your worries. You can simply breathe. Tonight we are going to travel together. We are going to go very far, very far back in time, to the 90s, to a time when the internet was something new and strange and full of possibilities, to a time when people still did not understand well what a computer connected to the telephone network was for. And at that time, in that quiet and curious moment, a small company called eBay was born. So, if you want, you can adjust your pillow. You can close your eyes if you are already tired. You can let my voice take you, gently, through this story. A story of money, of curious people, of small frauds and big scandals, from auctions held in rooms full of computers, and of a company that, unintentionally, changed the way the world bought and sold things. Let's get started. Rearenetistes. The year is 1995. Imagine that year. The world moves slower. The news arrives the next day in the newspaper. The phones still have wires. And when someone wanted to sell something they no longer needed, they had to take a small table out into the garden, or put an ad in the local paper, or just give it to a neighbor. There was something called a flea market. Physical places, with real people, walking between tables full of used objects, old mugs, second-hand books, radios of the 50s, shoes that had already traveled many paths. That was what existed. And then, very quietly, almost without anyone noticing, a young man sitting in his home in San Jose, California, had an idea. His name was Pierre Omidyar. Pierre was 28 years old at the time. He was a computer programmer. He wasn't famous. He was not rich. He was simply someone who worked with computers and thought a lot about the internet. Pierre was born in Paris, France. His parents were Iranian. He had come to the United States when he was little, and in 1995, he was living in California, working at a technology company called General Magic, and spending his free afternoons thinking about things that could be done with the internet. Imagine Pierre sitting in front of his computer. The screen shines softly in the room. Outside, San Jose continues with its quiet rhythm of a Californian city, and Pierre types, slowly, line by line of code. A simple website. Very simple. He called it Auction Web. Not eBay yet. Auction Web, a small page where anyone could post an object they wanted to sell, and other people could make offers, like an auction, but from their homes, without going out, without talking to anyone, just typing on the computer. Pierre launched it on September 30, 1995. It was a holiday weekend in the United States. Labor Day, they call it. Labor Day. And while many families were in the park or at home resting, Pierre published his website, and he waited.
Mindful.
What was the first thing sold on eBay? This question has a very curious answer, and it's kind of funny. If you imagine the scene, the first thing that was sold was a laser pointer, a broken laser pointer. It didn't work well. There was something wrong with him, and Pierre, who wanted to test whether his system worked, posted it thinking no one would buy it, that it was just an experiment, but someone bought it. He paid $14.83, and Pierre, a little surprised, wrote to that buyer to ask if he understood that the prompter was broken. The answer he received was something like, "Yes, I know. It's just that I collect broken laser pointers." And at that moment, Pierre understood something important, that in the world there are people for everything, that there are collectors of things that no one else wants, that the market doesn't have to be just for perfect, new items. The market can be for everything, for the broken and the strange and the forgotten, for what someone no longer serves, but what someone else lacks. That simple idea, that idea that fits in a single sentence, it was the heart of what would later become one of the largest sites on the internet. The page grew, very slowly at first. As all good things grow, Pierre was still working at his day job. In the evenings, he checked Auction Web. He answered emails, fixed bugs in the code. It added small improvements here and there. And people arrived, first little by little, then by the dozens, then hundreds. People who sold ancient coins, people who were looking for collectible figures, people who wanted to find old computer parts that were no longer being manufactured. Every week, the number of transactions grew a little more, and Pierre charged a small commission on each sale. At first, it was so small that it was barely noticeable, but when there are thousands of sales, small commissions become something bigger. By the early 1996s, Pierre was receiving more money from Auction Web than from his regular job, and he made a very calm decision. Very slow, he quit his job, and he dedicated himself full-time to his auction page. Now Pierre needed help. I couldn't do everything alone. He needed someone who understood business. Pierre was very good with code, with the systems, with technology, but business, finance, strategies, that was another world. And so a woman who would change everything entered the stage. Her name was Margaret Whitman, Meg Whitman. as everyone knows her. Meg came from a very different world than Pierre. He had studied at Harvard. He had worked in large and well-known companies. She had been director of marketing at Disney. He had managed the shoe division of Stride. He had worked at Hasbro, the toy company. Meg knew how to grow a company. He knew how to talk to investors. He knew how to organize teams of people. When she was offered the position of CEO of eBay in 1998, Meg was initially hesitant. The company was small, the headquarters was a humble place, and this internet auction thing still sounded very strange. But Meg went to see the company, and when he saw how many people were already using the site, when he saw the loyalty that buyers and sellers had, when he felt the energy of that community, he said yes, and everything changed. Meg Whitman arrived strongly but calmly. It was organized, methodical. He didn't scream. He didn't do great dramatic scenes. He just worked, and he organized, and he hired intelligent people, and he made decisions. Under his leadership, eBay grew impressively. When Meg arrived, in 1998, the company had about 30 employees. By the time she left more than a decade later, eBay had more than 15,000 employees, and it was one of the most valuable internet companies in the world. But the road was not always smooth. There were difficult moments. There was a crisis. There were scandals. There was fraud. And about all of that we are going to speak, gently, throughout this evening.
The Sound.
Before continuing with the dramas, let's talk for a moment about how eBay worked, because it's a very quiet story if you think about it. Imagine that you have a collection of action figures from the 80s at home. You don't want them anymore. They have been kept in a box for years. Your partner asks you to take them out, and you think, who am I going to sell this to? In 1996, instead of putting an ad in the newspaper, you could go to eBay. You took a photo, you wrote a description, you put a very low initial price, maybe $1, and you waited. For 7 days, other people would see your ad. If someone wanted your dolls, they made an offer. Then someone else would make a higher bid, and an even higher one. And at the end of the 7 days, the person with the highest bid won, and you received the money. eBay kept a small part. It's that simple. It's that calm. The system had something beautiful about its simplicity. The price was not set by you. It was set by the market. It was set by the real demand of real people who wanted your object. If only one person wanted it, the price was low. If 10 people wanted it strongly, the price went up. He was honest, in a way, like a quiet conversation between the seller and all his potential buyers. No intermediaries, no physical stores, no salespeople to pressure you. Only the offer, and the time that passes, and the price that rises, slowly, as bread rises in the oven. Warriors. But, as in any story, not everything was calm and honest on eBay. The world is complicated, and where there is money, there are always people who try to take what is not theirs. So settle in well, close your eyes if you want, and listen to this part of the story, the part of the less honest characters, the part that makes the story a little more interesting. The fraud of fake auctions. From very early on, eBay had a huge problem, and that problem had a simple name: trust. How do you know that the person selling you something is real? How do you know that what you buy really exists? Because on eBay, you sent your money before you received the item. First you paid, then you waited for what you bought to arrive. And some people, unscrupulous people, they published objects that they did not have, photos stolen from the internet, invented descriptions, and when someone paid, simply disappeared, without sending anything, no answering emails, without leaving a trace. This was called item not received fraud, and it was incredibly common in the early years of eBay. It was such a big problem that many people didn't want to use the site. Why risk your money buying something that might not arrive? eBay had to figure this out, and the solution they found was elegant in its simplicity. They created a reputation system. Think of it like this. After each transaction, both the buyer and seller could leave each other a small rating: positive, negative, or neutral, and those ratings accumulated in each user's profile. If you had 1,000 positive ratings, you were trustworthy. If you had 10 refusals, people doubted. That number, that little number next to your username, was your reputation on eBay. It was your identity. It was your word, and it worked. Not perfectly. Nothing ever works perfectly, but it worked hard enough, and eBay continued to grow. The case of the baseball card. There was a famous case in the early years of eBay that people still remember. It happened at the end of the 90s. There was a vendor who offered collectible baseball cards. Baseball cards were very popular as a collector's item. Small cardboard cards with a player's photo. Collectors sometimes paid thousands of dollars for a single card, and this salesman supposedly had a very rare card, very valuable. She posted it with photos that looked real, with a detailed description, and people started making offers. The auction went up, and it rose more, and in the end someone bought it for a very large amount. He sent his money, and he waited, and the card never arrived. The seller disappeared. eBay investigo, and he discovered that the photos were fake. The seller had stolen images from other legitimate auctions. I didn't have the card. I didn't have any cards. He only had a computer and the intention of cheating. This case, and others like it, put a lot of pressure on eBay. The company had to create a buyer protection program, a system where eBay would refund the money if something went wrong. Not always, not in all cases, but it is in many, and that helped restore trust. The Great Fraud of Art. One of the most fascinating scandals in eBay's history was the case of a man named Kenneth Walton. This man was a lawyer in Sacramento, California, and he was also a pretty creative con artist. What Kenneth did was the following. He bought worthless paintings at flea markets and thrift stores. He cleaned them, I photographed them in good light, and he published them on eBay as if they were works of recognized artists. But here comes the most interesting part. Kenneth didn't just put the painting up for sale. He also created fake accounts, multiple accounts, and with those fake accounts, he himself made offers on his own paintings. Why would I do that? Because that way the price went up. When a real buyer saw that the auction already had many bids, he thought that the object was valuable. I thought, if so many people want this, it must have something good, and he made his own offer, higher than all the previous ones. This practice of bidding at auction itself to inflate the price has a name. Shill bidding, offer of support, in Spanish. It's completely dishonest, and in many places it is also illegal. Kenneth Walton was discovered. Federal authorities investigated. They found that he had committed fraud through the network, and in the end, Kenneth had to pay a fine and pay money back. He also received a sentence of probation. But the most curious thing about the case is that Kenneth Walton later wrote a book about his experience. Lo llamó Fake, Forgery, Lies and eBay. Fakes, Lies and eBay. And in that book he told in quite a bit of detail how he had done what he did. It's almost as if he wanted everyone to know how smart he had been, although in the end he was not so intelligent. In the end he was caught. Vonnaeth, the sale of impossible things. In the early years of eBay, before there were a lot of rules, people were trying to sell amazing things. Things that shouldn't be able to be sold. And some of them really sold. Someone tried to sell a kidney. Yes, a human organ. The auction fetched $5 million before eBay pulled it. Someone tried to sell the city of Texas, New York, a small municipality, all-inclusive. Someone put his soul up for sale, literally, with a very careful description explaining what the deal included. eBay had to gradually create rules about what could and could not be sold. At first those rules did not exist, and that absence of rules produced situations that today seem from another planet. It was a completely free market, completely wild, like the Old West, but digital, and with much less dust. Vodas. The year is 1999. eBay is already a huge company. Its shares are listed on the stock exchange. There are millions of users, millions of transactions every week. And then, in June of 1999, the system collapsed. Not a little. Soon, the eBay site was down, completely inaccessible, for 22 hours straight. Can you imagine it? A company whose entire business depends on their website working, and the website is not working, for almost a full day. The auctions that were about to end were suspended. Buyers and sellers could not access their accounts. Complaint emails filled the company's inboxes. It was a huge crisis, a disaster, and it all happened because eBay's servers, the computers that ran the site, simply couldn't handle the amount of traffic that was there. There were too many people trying to get in at the same time, and the system, which had been designed for a much smaller number of users, simply gave up. Meg Whitman handled the crisis calmly, or at least that's what it showed to the outside. Internally, there were many urgent meetings, many technicians working without sleep, lots of coffee, many errors detected and corrected. And when the site was back up and running, eBay offered compensation to users, free publication days, time extensions in affected auctions. It was a difficult time, but the company survived, and he learned from it. It invested huge amounts of money in improving its technical infrastructure, so that something like this would not happen again, or at least, not so often. The purchase of PayPal. Let's talk about money now. How to pay on eBay, because this is a very interesting chapter of history. In the early years, paying on eBay was complicated. Shoppers were mailing checks in the mail, or money orders, or bank transfers. Everything was slow, everything was uncomfortable, and everything was imperfect, because a check can take days to arrive, and it may be false, and it can be canceled. Then came a company called PayPal. PayPal was a way to send money over the internet instantly. You connected your bank account or your credit card, and you could send money to any email address. It's that simple. The folks at eBay adopted PayPal quickly, without anyone telling them to do so, without eBay organizing it. Simply, eBay users started using PayPal because it was easier, faster, safer, and eBay noticed this. And in 2002, eBay bought PayPal. It paid $1.5 billion. It was one of the most important purchases in the history of the internet, and for many years, PayPal was the primary way to pay on eBay. And also outside of eBay, PayPal grew to become a huge company in its own right. And in the year 2015, eBay and PayPal parted ways. They became two independent companies again, like a marriage that lasts for many years and then decides that each can do better on their own. Today, PayPal is worth tens of billions of dollars, and it is one of the most used payment platforms in the world. And it all started with people who wanted to pay for their auctions more easily. The purchase of Skype, and the error. eBay also made some mistakes, big and costly mistakes. The most famous was the purchase of Skype. Skype was an internet calling service in 2005. You could talk to people anywhere in the world without paying normal phone rates. It was a revolutionary technology. eBay paid $2.6 billion for Skype, more than $2 billion, a huge amount. And the reason eBay gave at the time was that Skype could help buyers and sellers communicate more easily. Imagine you want to buy a car on eBay. Maybe you want to talk to the seller on the phone. Ask questions, listen to their voice. That was the idea. But in practice, the integration never worked well. eBay users weren't using Skype in the way the company expected. The combination of auctions of used objects and voice calls simply did not fit naturally. 4 years later, in 2009, eBay sold Skype. He sold it for almost $2 billion. It had paid more than $2 billion. So in simple terms, eBay lost hundreds of millions of dollars with that decision. It was an expensive mistake, but it was also a learning experience. Not all decisions in business are correct, and large companies, like individuals, sometimes pay a lot of money to learn lessons. Now let's talk about gossip, because every great company has its internal dramas. There are conflicts between powerful people, their meetings where voices are raised, your emails that should never have been sent. eBay was no different. The arrival and departure of several directors after Meg Whitman, who left the company in 2008 to pursue politics, came John Donahoe. John was different from Meg, more analytical, more data-oriented, and under his leadership, eBay tried to evolve. The website changed. It added more fixed-price options, not just auctions. And here's the drama. Many old eBay sellers didn't like the changes. They had built their businesses on the auction model, and suddenly, eBay wanted to be more like Amazon. To a normal store, where prices are fixed and auctions are secondary. There were protests, vendor groups that organized boycotts, that they stopped posting their items on eBay for days or weeks as a form of protest, that they wrote open letters to the company, that filled the eBay forums with complaints. It was as if the inhabitants of a flea market arrived on a Monday to find that their longtime market had been converted into a supermarket, without anyone asking them, without anyone warning them. Only they arrived and the market was already different.
That's leaks of wee bitties.
The corporate spying scandal. In the year 2019, something happened that seems to be taken from a thriller, but that was completely real, and it's documented in public court records. eBay was accused of organizing a harassment campaign against two normal people, David and Ina Steiner, a married couple from Massachusetts. What did David and Ina Steiner do? They had a newsletter, a small newsletter, called E-commerce Bites, a newsletter that talked about news in e-commerce. And sometimes that newsletter published reviews of eBay, articles that were not favorable for the company, things that eBay executives didn't want published. And then, according to investigations and court documents, a group of eBay employees, including people from the security team, staged what can only be described as a campaign of terror. They began to send disturbing objects to the Steiner house, anonymously. A pig mask, a wreath of flowers like those worn at funerals, live cockroaches, live spiders, a book about surviving the loss of a loved one. And they also began to stalk them on the internet, to monitor your communications, to try to follow them physically, all to frighten these two people who were simply writing an e-commerce newsletter. When the investigation revealed all this, the world was shocked. Several eBay employees were criminally charged. Some pleaded guilty. Some received jail sentences. And eBay had to pay a huge amount of money as part of a settlement with the authorities. $3 million. And he also had to pay compensation to the Steiners. The company publicly apologized. He said that kind of behavior did not represent his values, that what had happened was completely unacceptable. But the damage was already done. The image of eBay was stained by this episode for a long time. And one question remained floating in the air. How is it possible that such a large company, with so many lawyers and so many executives, would allow something like this to happen? That question still doesn't have a completely satisfactory answer. The story of the executive and the collector's seller. There is another story that many people do not know. It is quieter than the previous one, but it also reveals how things worked within eBay. During the early years of the site, eBay relied heavily on certain sellers. They called them power sellers, powerful salespeople, individuals, or small businesses that sold large quantities of objects. That generated a lot of traffic, a lot of money in commissions for eBay, and eBay treated them very well. He gave them discounts on commissions, special access to customer service representatives, special publishing tools. It was almost a partner-to-partner relationship. But when eBay grew larger and changed its policies, many of those major sellers felt abandoned. There were cases of sellers who had built million-dollar businesses on eBay, that they were completely dependent on the site for their income, and that suddenly, with a change in policies, they saw their businesses falter. Because eBay changed the rules, he increased commissions, it changed search algorithms, he began to favor certain types of salespeople over others, and sellers who had grown up with eBay, who had built their reputations there, simply had nowhere to go. He is an Amazon, or they were looking for other platforms, or they simply closed. It's a story that repeats itself in many tech companies, the small business ecosystem that grows around a large platform, and the constant tension between what's good for the platform and what's good for those small businesses. Thus, the world of the internet changed a lot between the year 2000 and the year 2000, and it kept changing. Amazon appeared, big, huge, with millions of new products and very low prices. The smartphone appeared, and with it, the ability to buy things from anywhere, at any time. Craigslist appeared, to sell locally without the need for shipments. Etsy appeared, for crafts and handmade objects. Poshmark appeared, for second-hand clothes. Mercado Libre appeared, for Latin America. The market was filled with alternatives, and eBay had to decide what it wanted to be. A general store like Amazon, a collector's platform, a second-hand market, all of those things at the same time. For years, eBay tried to be several things, and sometimes that lack of clarity was noticeable. The website was complicated, the policies were difficult to understand, and many users preferred Amazon's simplicity. Enter, look for what you want, buy it, may it come tomorrow. No auctions, without waiting 7 days, no negotiating with individual sellers. Amazon was like a shiny and efficient supermarket. eBay was like a digital flea market. And, depending on what you're looking for, one or the other is better. But the supermarket has more traffic. It always has more traffic. The separation of PayPal. We have already talked briefly about this, but it deserves one more moment of attention, because the separation of PayPal in 2015 was a huge event. For years, eBay and PayPal had been one company, a single ticker on the stock exchange. But a well-known investor, Carl Icahn, publicly pushed for them to separate. Carl Icahn was famous for buying shares of large companies and then pushing them to make changes. Sometimes that improved the company. Sometimes it created a lot of drama. In the case of eBay and PayPal, Icahn argued that the two companies would be worth more separately than together, that each could grow more independently without having to carry the other. There were months of public debates, articles in financial newspapers, meetings of directors, and in the end, eBay and PayPal parted ways. Today, PayPal is a much more valuable company than eBay. PayPal is worth more than $100 billion at certain times. eBay is worth a lot less. And some analysts say Carl Icahn was right. Others say it would have been better for them to stay together. Those are the conversations being held on Wall Street. Conversations that sometimes seem very important and other times seem like unanswered debates. How to discuss whether it should rain yesterday instead of today. The money is gone. The company has already separated, and the world continues to turn. eBay still exists today. What started as Pierre Omidyar's simple page is still there, with millions of articles published every day, with buyers and sellers in hundreds of countries. It's not the most exciting company on the internet. Perhaps it never was. It was always something more calm, more in-depth, like a store that you have known for many years. That doesn't change much. That is always there when you need it. And there's something beautiful about that. Imagine a person somewhere in the world, maybe in Mexico, maybe in Spain, maybe in Argentina, that he has a box full of objects at home. Things that he accumulated over the years. Books he has already read. Clothes that no longer fit. Figures of characters from series that have already ended. And that person thinks, who can be of use to these things? And go to eBay, and he publishes his objects. And wait, and in some other country, someone who collects those same figures of characters, someone who has been looking for that book you've already read for years, he finds it, make an offer, and days later, something she wanted with great desire arrives in her mailbox. Something that no longer had value for you. But for that person, it is exactly what I was looking for. That small transaction, that silent exchange between two strangers through a website, that is what Pierre Omidyar envisioned in 1995, that the objects could find the people who need them, that the market could be global, that distances did not matter. And while eBay didn't always pull it off perfectly, although there were frauds and scandals and costly mistakes and corporate dramas, the central idea, that simple idea of connecting those who have something with those who want it, that idea survived, and it continues to work every day. We are coming to the end of this story. But before we finish, I want to tell you some more curiosities. Small stories within the big story. Things that happened on eBay that are difficult to classify elsewhere because they are simply curious and calm to listen. Famous things that were sold on eBay. Over the years, very particular things were sold on eBay. In the year 2000, a man named Andrew Fisher sold his forehead, his literal forehead, the space in his head, for a company to put a temporary tattoo of its logo. A food company called Snore Stop paid $37,500 for that space, and Mr. Fisher appeared on television with the logo on the forehead for 30 days. It made headlines all over the world.
Root cause.
In the year 2004, someone sold a grilled cheese sandwich in English, but it wasn't just any sandwich. It was a 10-year-old sandwich. A woman named Diana Diesser said that on that sandwich, you could see the face of the Virgin Mary. The sandwich sold for $28,000. It was bought by a casino company called GoldenPalace.com. That he also bought many other weird things on eBay to get publicity. The sandwich was displayed in several places. It still exists. It still looks like a very old sandwich. And there are still people who say they can see the face. Maverds Iowa. In 2005, British rock star Justin Hawkins sold a cough drop, a pill that he had sucked during a concert, and that someone paid £900 for a used pill. eBay is that kind of place, where each object has its price, and that price is set by the market, and the market is sometimes very, very strange. Some eBay numbers. Before we say goodbye, let me tell you some numbers. Quiet numbers. Numbers you can hear with your eyes closed. At its peak, eBay had more than 150 million active users. Every minute, thousands of new articles were published on the site. There were listings in over 100 countries, more than 30 languages available. Every day, millions of transactions were completed. Millions of small silent conversations between buyers and sellers. Millions of objects finding new owners. Millions of people sending packages from their homes. Millions of people waiting at the door of his building for the postman to arrive. All of that generated by a 28-year-old man with a computer and a simple idea. And so ends the story of eBay. For now, because the company still exists, and it will continue to have its moments, their difficult decisions, their changes of direction, his little scandals, your quiet innovations, your dedicated salespeople, and your enthusiastic buyers. But that's for another episode, for another quiet night, for when you want to come back and hear more. For now, if you're still awake, okay, there is no hurry. You can let this story stay with you for a moment longer. You can imagine Pierre Omidyar in his California bedroom. The year is 1995. The screen shines softly. The code appears line by line. Outside, San Jose continues with its quiet rhythm. A dog barks in the distance, and then falls silent. A car passes by on the street, and Pierre continues typing. Slowly, no hurry, building something that you don't yet know will change the world. Now imagine the flea market, the tables full of objects, the soft light of the morning, the smell of coffee in a nearby stall, people who walk slowly, looking at things, picking up objects and putting them down again, negotiating prices calmly. That same market, that same quiet rhythm of exchange, it moved to the internet, and it multiplied, and it became huge. But at its core, in his quietest heart, it's still the same. A person has something, someone else wants it, and somewhere between the two, the deal is made. Thank you for joining me tonight, or this afternoon, or any time you've heard this. I hope your body is more relaxed than when we started. I hope your eyes are heavy. I hope that the day you had is already far away, like an object sold on eBay that has already gone to another house. It's not yours anymore. That's it, and you can rest.